Anne here, and this is More Than a Love Interest, the show where we talk about the arcs of female characters in film. Today we are continuing the series on my favorite Avenger, Natasha Romanoff, the Black Widow, as we get ready for her solo movie to come out. Nat's second appearance was in 2012's The Avengers. She breaks cover almost right away, and she gets something of a character arc. So we are going to return to my usual format. First, we'll talk about her agency in the movie, then her character arc, and finally her relationships with other characters. Let's get started. Unlike her previous appearance in Iron Man 2, we do get more from her perspective, and she has a lot of influence on the events of the film.
Thank you for your cooperation.
One of the reasons why I think this movie is still a delightful watch after almost 10 years, when the storylines have progressed considerably and certain directors are difficult to revisit, is because of how much agency everyone gets to have. Everyone gets a moment, or several, to shine. And it never feels like anyone is forced into a certain response by the situation they're in, or just to drive the plot. For example, Clint says very little and is brainwashed for most of the film, but we still get this introduction.
Yeah, the cube is a doorway to the other end of space, right? The door's open from both sides.
Showing that he is smart as well as good with arrows. Our main characters have similar moments throughout, figuring out Loki's plan, or Fury's, or just having good ideas. Everyone gets to have some valuable input, and for the most part, the plot hinges on this input for development. It makes for a very character-driven film, and that is why it is such a fun movie to revisit. So what moments does Natasha have? What do we learn about her, and how does she contribute to the plot? I've broken her scenes down into 3 categories: spy scenes, spectacle scenes, and sentimental scenes, because I enjoy alliteration. First, her spy scenes are when she uses her intelligence to solve a problem rather than any brute force. These add to what we saw from her in the previous movie to show how she is a very capable agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. We are introduced to her through one of these when she appears to be interrogated by the Russian mob. However, when Coulson calls, she quickly drops her cover and shows her hand. She was learning everything she wanted to know, and was perfectly capable of getting herself out of the situation at any moment. This is her day in the life scene, before she becomes an Avenger, which most of them have in this movie. This interrogation foreshadows a later one, with Loki. For that scene, we cut from Fury asking Thor about how much he's willing to do to stop Loki.
What are you asking me to do?
I'm asking, what are you prepared to do?
To Nat, who has snuck up on him.
There's not many people who can sneak up on me.
He is surprised and prone to pontification, so she plays on that.
Can you wipe out that much red?
Where he expects emotion from her, she gives it, until she gets him to slip up.
You're a monster.
You brought the monster.
So, Banner, that's your play.
Just like with the Russians at the beginning, she knows how to manipulate people into talking, by appearing to be vulnerable and safe to gloat to. Another of her spy scenes is going to get Bruce Banner out of Calcutta. I will talk more about this scene in a later section, but she shows considerable preparation for this interaction. She has a little girl, very non-threatening, lead him outside of town so minimal damage may result. She has perhaps a couple dozen agents waiting outside to contain him if necessary. She presents herself as very non-threatening as well, insisting that they only want his scientific expertise.
It emits a gamma signature that's too weak for us to trace. There's no one that knows gamma radiation like you do.
Then offering up what S.H.I.E.L.D. has already done for him as proof of being good allies.
We never lost you, Doctor. We've kept our distance. Even helped keep some other interested parties off your scent.
It's a masterful job, even if he does push her to the point of breaking the illusion she's set up.
No one's gonna put you in...
Stop lying to me! I'm sorry, that was mean.
Still, he was recruited, so it was a success.
Stand down.
The final spy scene happens at the end of the movie, the reason for which I will discuss more in the section with her character arc. The moment is when she decides that fighting the Chitauri is damage control, and they need to do more if they're ever going to win.
Captain, none of this is gonna mean a damn thing if we don't close that portal.
Our biggest guns couldn't touch it.
Oh, maybe it's not about guns.
She suggests to Steve that there must be a way to close the portal, and then goes up to see what she can do herself. Selvig tells her he put in a failsafe, and she is the one who closes the portal, ending the fight. Well, more accurately, Tony causes all of the Chitauri to die, and she prevents a nuclear blast from following him through. But in any case, the event is ended because of her and her abilities as a spy.
I can close it! Can anybody copy?
Next, the spectacle scenes don't require much discussion, they just look cool. These would include her fight in the opening scene with the Russians. I especially like her hanging up this guy, like he's on some kind of spider web. Other spectacle scenes are anytime it cuts back to her while she's fighting the Chitauri. Finally, one I really like is how she gets to the top of Stark Tower.
I got a ride. I could use a boost, though.
She basically tells Steve and Clint to help her,
What are you doing?
A little help!
but more as a team member than as a female who can't do it herself. It leaves the viewer with confidence that she could have gone up there on her own, but we get to enjoy how important teamwork is for all of them. And finally, the sentimental scenes. These get more into her character motivation and are about her as a person more than an action figure. Though we see some of her humor in earlier scenes,
I thought Coulson was gonna swoon. Did he ask you to sign his Captain America trading cards yet?
I'd say a big one of these is when she is fleeing the Hulk, who is just transformed on the helicarrier. And while the whole scene is good, the most emotional we see her is right here. Bruce threw her a little off her game in Calcutta, but she is absolutely wrecked here. And I love that we get to see her be so upset, but then compose herself and get back to work. It's a very relatable moment, one that we don't get to see that often for strong female characters. Now, before you bring it up, yes, she does show emotion with Loki, but since she recovers within moments and seems fine, it's difficult to tell how much of that was genuine. She's a master spy, and I would imagine it is easy enough to let yourself react to someone talking about true events from your life.
Dreykov's daughter. Sao Paulo. The hospital fire.
But who knows how deeply she really feels about any of them. Bringing us to the biggest sentimental moments she has, those with Clint Barton. First, the fight with him is very different from the others that we've seen her in. It is much more personal, and more of a knockdown, drag-out fight than the deadly ballet she usually favors. There's no way to know his emotions here, if he has any, while brainwashed, but it's very emotional for her. And then they have a heart-to-heart, in what might be the most emotionally driven scene in the film.
You know what it's like to be unmade.
You know that I do.
Through this scene, we can piece together how genuine the discussion with Loki actually was. She absolves Clint of guilt,
Don't do that to yourself, Clint.
something she later does with Selvig,
It's not your fault. You didn't know what you were doing.
and Steve in the next movie,
None of that's your fault, Steve.
clearly pointing to how guilty she herself feels about her past and what she's done. We never really get a good picture of what that was,
I made a name for myself. I have a very specific skill set.
but it is a consistent part of her character and what drives her to be a hero. In a movie packed with different characters playing off of each other, it is really great that we got this quiet scene. We learn a lot about Nat and her motivations, making her feel just as fleshed out and important as the other members of the team. Next, we are going to talk about Nat's journey throughout the film. Let me preface this by saying that I think many of her actions are primarily to serve the story, not her own character arc, but I think we can read a character arc into it nonetheless. She starts out as a spy, comfortable in her wheelhouse, and she breaks out of it to battle aliens and gods by the end.
This is monsters and magic and nothing we were ever trained for.
It's not a complicated arc, but it is an arc. So, as usual, I will be using Maureen Murdock's heroine's journey to talk us through it. The first step is the separation from the feminine. Now, Natasha has really no interactions with other women in this film, but on a more symbolic level, she separates from herself. from where she is most comfortable. The feminine for her is spycraft. She is a spy, and we see her in her element, undercover and getting all the information she wants effortlessly. In her previous appearance, she was in her role as a spy for the whole movie. Even though she was not undercover at the end, she was still working for Fury and doing what is probably a pretty regular day for her as a high-level S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. This movie takes her out of that and starts her on a new journey. The second step is gathering masculine allies. For the purposes of this discussion, I'm going to define the masculine as the soon-to-be Avengers. They are, of course, literally masculine, but more to the point, their methods and the situation they're in is all quite different from what Nat usually deals with as a spy. Nat's first masculine ally is Bruce Banner. As I talked about before, she uses espionage tactics to lure him to meet with her, adopting a very non-threatening persona.
I assume the whole place is surrounded?
Just you and me.
When he pushes her, she reacts, but not like she reacted to Happy pushing her in the last movie. There, she did enough to catch Tony's attention, but not enough to blow her cover. Here, she drops the facade and reveals that she isn't there for a friendly chat. Still, her honesty works, apparently, and she brings Banner in. Her next ally is Steve Rogers, who was just brought in by Coulson. This meeting is much less fraught than her meetings with the other two. She treats him like a normal person, calling out Coulson's behavior as weird. You can argue whether this is strategic of her or not, but I think she certainly recognizes his awkwardness and tries to set him at ease by roasting a coworker. Very relatable. The third step is the road of trials. For Nat, this is the steps it takes to track down Loki and Clint.
Loki has him under some kind of spell, along with one of ours.
She came in to help with finding and rescuing Clint.
Barton's been compromised.
So the steps it takes to find out where he is and trying to figure out what Loki is doing make up these trials. This includes Bruce's search for the gamma radiation signature, finding Loki in Germany, Steve and Nat going to get him, Tony showing up to help, Thor coming to fetch Loki, and the boys fighting before they all return to the helicarrier. The illusion of success comes from when Nat goes to interrogate Loki. We have already seen her get the information she wanted out of the Russian mob, and now she goes up against the literal god of mischief, and succeeds. Again, she plays up her own practicality about the situation.
It's really not that complicated. I got red in my ledger. I'd like to wipe it out.
Prompting him to counter with an attack on her emotions.
Can you wipe out that much red?
She reacts emotionally to make him think his tactics against her worked. But she must have a guess about why he's there, because she calls him a monster. He refers to their own monster, the Hulk, and she breaks her cover to let him know that he's been played.
Thank you for your cooperation.
Unfortunately, the success is not long-lasting and leads to the next two steps on the journey. As is often the case, these two occur together, spiritual aridity and the descent. For Natasha, this is when the clue she got about Loki's plan is for nothing, because the Hulk is still unleashed. And worse, for her, because she is right there when he is. She tries her calming tactics on him, but nothing works. Even though she just managed to manipulate a god, she knows this is not a situation she's equipped to handle. She waves off the approaching S.H.I.E.L.D. techs who would help them, and does her best to talk him down.
We're gonna be okay, right?
And then flees, doing whatever she can to slow his rampage. Eventually Thor comes along and saves the day. I wish we got more of an interaction between them.
And he's my brother.
He killed 80 people in 2 days.
He's adopted.
Anyway, this is a rough moment. She is very aware of her powerlessness during this scene, barely escaping with her life. When she's rescued, she hides out and looks absolutely terrified. In terms of the journey, she has left the feminine to seek out masculine allies, specifically Banner, and now that is blown up in her face. She's at her darkest point here, rethinking her decisions to leave her realm of spies to enter this place of gods and monsters, which brings us to the next step. The seventh step is urgently yearning to reconnect with the feminine. Again, the feminine for Nat is being a spy, and she really wants to get back to that. So when she hears that Clint is in need of dealing with, she composes herself to go do something she feels she can do. She pulls herself out of that dark moment and reconnects with her past. Clint may be brainwashed, but he is still Clint, and she knows how to handle him. So she leaves the masculine allies she's made in this movie behind, for a moment, to address the part of her she's been separated from. Healing the split with the feminine is the eighth step. Now, I'm not saying Clint is the feminine, of course, but Nat's relationship with him, and with being a spy, is part of her feminine. Cognitive recalibration brings him back into the fold.
I hit you really hard in the head.
And she heals the split that started all of this. Her first scene took her away from her comfortable world because Coulson told her Clint was compromised. And now she's done what she set out to do, gotten him back.
Now you sound like you.
The ninth step is making peace with the masculine. Nat left her world of spies to get into all of this, something she may regret doing, because she was looking out for Clint. But when it comes up whether or not to keep being involved, she insists on dealing with monsters and magic, though they were not trained for it. Her excuse is that she is compromised. Maybe going back to that comfortable world of being a spy is no longer possible for her. Not when she has a chance to do some real good, wiping a lot of red from her ledger. And so we get to the final step of the journey. Nat fights alongside her masculine allies, protecting civilians and doing good until she is exhausted and out of ammo. Then she goes back to her roots as a spy and decides there must be a strategic option rather than fighting this army.
You're a spy, not a soldier.
She is the one to close the portal, ending the whole adventure and her role in it. The team goes their separate ways, and she gets a ride from Clint, presumably to his farm. As we see in the next movie, she returns to her role as a spy, but she is ready to be an Avenger again when she's needed. This movie is very efficient at introducing and defining characters, and Nat is no exception. She had pretty limited emotional depth in the previous appearance, but we see a whole range of emotions for her here. We learn about her past.
Is she a spy too? They start that young?
I did.
And how she feels about it.
I got red in my ledger. I'd like to wipe it out.
And can extrapolate what drives her to become one of the Avengers. It's a solid journey, and it was definitely what made me initially interested in her as a character. Finally, we are going to talk about her relationships. Since this is a team-up movie, it is important to see how she plays off of the other main characters. More importantly, this movie is set up to have moments of the heroes measuring off against each other as much as they do the villain. Meeting Thor leads to this, and this, for example. Tony and Steve fighting is safe for Civil War, I assume. But we get some fights between everyone, to both establish their abilities and to be something that's overcome triumphantly for the end of the movie. So let's talk about how Nat fits into that. I'm going to start with a villain, for fun. One great thing about Nat that we saw in the last movie is that she knows how to play off of people's expectations. That is how she got close to Tony, and arguably to Pepper. And we were reminded of that skill of hers in her introduction to this movie. So she is using that ability again here, presenting a version of herself that Loki expects. She is dressed as the spy, there to bargain for another spy. He underestimates her by thinking her practical approach is not taking him seriously enough. And that's how she takes advantage of his ego to learn what his plan actually is. So while physical strength might be a different story, she is the clear victor in their battle of wits. Which is why, though Fury approached Thor as a contingency plan, Nat was his plan A, because he trusts her. We unfortunately don't get much more of her relationship with Fury in this movie, nor does her relationship with Tony expand beyond a few quips.
I'm bringing the party to you.
There are some references to him holding a grudge from the last movie,
I don't see how that's a party.
which I think we can go ahead and add as another tally in her favor. On to Steve. They meet under fairly straightforward circumstances. She's even wearing her civilian clothes for the first time. No subterfuge here. She leads him around at the beginning, then, later, when the Hulk and Thor are gone, when the helicarrier was attacked and barely keeps from plummeting out of the sky, Steve goes to get Nat for the next step.
Go where?
I'll tell you on the way. Can you fly one of those jets?
And I think that's pretty noteworthy because of how Steve has reason to distrust S.H.I.E.L.D. at this point, and there isn't much reason for him to think Nat would be any different. He even trusts her judgment about bringing Clint along, despite his brainwashing. So that's a good moment for her, and I wish we were given more reason as to why, since we see later that being trusted is pretty precious to her. Anyway, we will talk about their relationship in the next episode, but I really like how it is established here. Next, of course, we need to talk about her interactions with Bruce. Like with Tony, she has a plan of approach to get close to him. It involves being out of town, with backup, and presenting herself as non-threateningly as possible. She's wearing the most soft feminine thing we ever see her wearing. Compare this outfit to what she wore to meet Tony the first time, and how she acted in each situation. She is here to gently negotiate with Bruce and bring him in, so she dresses and acts like it. He successfully scares her out of her ruse, though, showing that Bruce and the Hulk have a more direct approach, which can overcome her arsenal. This is further shown when the Hulk is unleashed on the helicarrier, and though she has a lot of tricks up her sleeve, she is on the losing side of that encounter. The next time they meet is in New York, when he shows up. She assures him they could use his help.
I've seen worse.
Sorry.
No, we could use a little worse.
And then the real fight begins. Even though she was visibly terrified, she doesn't hold that against him. She has a pattern of absolving other people of guilt, first with Banner, then with Clint and Selvig for being mind-controlled. It is something that she understands, and I think that speaks to her level of empathy, that her first instinct is to assure them their actions were not their fault. In any case, this interaction seems more like her acknowledging that he scored points against her, the only one in the movie to do so, and now she wants him as an ally instead. This reflects how all of the other fights have resolved by this point, so it's good timing thematically as well as strategically. And finally, let's talk about Clint. We don't see them interact until near the end of the film, but much of her motivation is based on him. She comes in to help because he's compromised. This is ostensibly her reason for talking to Loki.
Your world in the balance, and you bargained for one man.
Though, of course, that was part of her ruse. Still, their shared backstory is revealed during that scene.
Agent Barton was sent to kill me. He made a different call.
Then, they finally meet while he is being controlled, and have a rough fight. Master assassins, obviously. She cognitively recalibrates him successfully, though not strategically. It is her messiest fight, probably in the MCU, and has the least strategy involved in any part of it. She doesn't try to get civilians away or lure him somewhere to her advantage. She sneaks up on him, but then it is just a fight. One that is a challenge, but she is clearly the victor. Despite the claim that she was compromised, despite the film showing clearly that this is the one personal connection for her, she can still get the job done. As Scarlett Johansson says, "The widow always wins." Then this leads to one of the most emotional scenes in the film, because even if she could do her job, Nat is compromised. She tells him so later, when he is back to himself, and wants to know why she would want to get involved. She does not dwell on her feelings, and is visibly uncomfortable having the conversation. He saved her from whatever dark path she was on before S.H.I.E.L.D., and while she certainly feels she owes him for that, I think it's safe to say there is more to it. You can read that interaction however you want, but the bond between them is pretty well established in this, their second scene together. Next, we get to see them fighting together in New York, using the skills we saw develop during earlier conflicts to try to defeat the Chitauri here. We get a fun reference to Nat and Clint's shared past.
Just like Budapest all over again!
You and I remember Budapest very differently.
Showing that they are allies once again, if not more. At the very end, she makes a joke at Loki's expense for him, and they head off somewhere together. Now, while Loki is the antagonist of the movie, the central conceit is really whether or not the group will come together, which is emphasized by how antagonistic many of the introductions are. And then they do come together to be a team, and it's a fun celebration of that for the last hour or so, with some angst thrown in to keep us invested. And Nat is firmly established as part of the group, not only because of her contributions to the plot, but because of how her abilities are established and measured in minor conflicts before the final battle. And I love that Nat gets to be as much a part of that as the male heroes, so we know that she may not always win, but she can certainly hold her own. She is a superhero, after all.
Thank you for your cooperation.
So, is Nat more than a love interest?
Is this love, Agent Romanoff?
Love is for children. I owe him a debt.
Definitely. Though her motivation is predominantly based around Hawkeye, she is not reduced to this being her only role in the movie. She has a job to do and may be involved because of him, but certainly contributes significantly to moving the plot forward with her own agency and choices. Not because she is in need of rescue or because she's waiting and worrying about a man. Even when she is rescued, it is not in the way that highlights her fragile femininity. Instead, she is a strong, capable spy who is a little bit out of her element in this movie, but doing her best. And her best is a considerable help to the rest of the team, both in forming it and saving them. It's a great representation of the first female Avenger.
I made a name for myself.
Alright, let's close this with a book recommendation. Continuing my comic book recommendations, next is my personal favorite, Black Widow, The Name of the Rose, featuring some of the best lines she's ever said. Thank you for listening to me talk about the second appearance of my favorite MCU character. Next time, we'll talk about how a spy movie is the perfect place for her in Captain America, The Winter Soldier.
The person who developed this is slightly smarter than me. Slightly.
Please like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, all the things so you don't miss it. See you then!